What is the mystery surrounding the problem Leclerc had in Hungary? In today's video, we will look at the different hypotheses regarding the chassis, the wear of the floor, and even the possibility of disqualification for Leclerc. In fact, the structural issue Leclerc experienced could have had various origins. In today's video, we will see what the team says, and I will also tell you which option is most likely from my point of view. Additionally, we will review Lewis Hamilton's statements, Vassar's comments, and some positive remarks from Andrea Stella about Ferrari. Before we start, I want to tell you that this will be the last video before the summer break, so at the end, I will also give an overview of how the teams have performed in the first part of the season. Moreover, I want to let you know that this week the famous video visiting the McLaren Center in Woking will be released. I can't wait to publish that video, so don't miss it. That said, before starting this video, please leave a support like, and now let's look at everything in detail. The Hungarian GP raised more questions than answers for Ferrari, starting with Charles Leclerc's pole position, which seemed to promise a breakthrough until his vertical crash during the race. The post-weekend analysis revolves around a technical mystery involving the chassis, floor, and even a disqualification hypothesis, while Lewis Hamilton is experiencing the most difficult moment of his recent career. Amidst on-track problems and rumors of a possible departure, he simply can't get comfortable with this SF25. He even says he's not the right driver for Ferrari and that Ferrari should look elsewhere. Very heavy words from a 7-time world champion. Meanwhile, McLaren dominates and strikes hard, while at Mercedes, George Russell is back to instill fear and secures a podium. Let's talk about Leclerc. There is a structural problem with the SF25 because we have already seen several issues since the beginning of the season. Leclerc started the weekend brilliantly, winning a close battle with McLaren by a thousandth. However, during the race, his pace drastically dropped in the third stint, going from a potential winner to just an observer. After the second pit stop, the Monegasco was no longer able to keep up with Norris or Piastri, even finishing off the podium, overtaken by Russell. The team initially mentioned balancing issues and a possible chassis damage, but as hours passed, another hypothesis emerged, where on the floor linked to the bouncing recorded in the early stages of the race. According to some reports in the paddock, the SF25 was even at risk of disqualification for technical non-compliance. If it had shown excessive tire wear in regulated points according to Fiat Leclerc radio, he had harshly vented, "I can't drive like this," but then he admitted there was something he didn't know. Now I understand. A detail that suggests a structural problem that emerged too late. Team principal Frederick Watzer admitted that the disappointment is great. According to him, Leclerc had the pace to compete with the McLarens, but something didn't work. He also emphasized how Hamilton's race was influenced by the DRS trains, but overall Ferrari couldn't respond when it mattered. Passayer hesitated and said, "If everything had gone smoothly, we would have been there. The performance was there, but we couldn't capitalize on it, and George Russell brought Mercedes onto the podium, outsmarting Leclerc." It was actually the same George Russell who offered an alternative and unsettling interpretation. In fact, according to him, the SF25 showed signs of suspicious wear on the floor. I didn't hear what Ferrari said, but from the outside, it seemed they were at risk of a technical infringement. They lost too much pace in too little time. This isn't the first time a team has been monitored for floor wear. Let's remember Austin 2023 when Hamilton and Leclerc were disqualified for the same reason, or even the disqualification that happened in China this year. If this hypothesis is confirmed, it could explain many things, and Hamilton's weekend was disastrous. Poor in qualifying, terrible in the race, out of points without ever being competitive. And in the post-race interview, Lewis seemed particularly frustrated. There are things happening behind the scenes that I don't like. Some drivers talk about a lack of technical harmony with the team, others about personal disappointment due to the difficulty of adapting to the SF25. At the moment, the only certainty is that Hamilton is unrecognizable and Ferrari cannot help him. Meanwhile, as all these situations unfold, we see a McLaren that continues to dominate despite Leclerc managing to take pole position with a sensational lap, surpassing everyone, making a difference more through talent than the car itself. On the other hand, we have seen a very strong McLaren in the second half of the race, but be aware that Andrea Stella has stated that Ferrari will be competitive in the second part of the season and will be able to fight with McLaren for victories. We know that Andrea Stella is very honest in his statements, unlike, for example, Toto Wolff or Christian Horner. So I take his words as true. We saw an excellent pace from Ferrari in the first part of the race when there was no technical problem for Leclerc, so without that issue Ferrari could have fought comfortably for the victory. Of course, it was two drivers, Norris and Piastri, against one driver, Leclerc, so there was a numerical difference, but in terms of pace, Charles was on par with the McLarens, and despite Norris starting worse in Hungary, he managed to capitalize on the best strategy to win the race. Surely, Piastri was disappointed about the missed victory. McLaren continues to emphasize that they do not want to give team orders and leave their drivers free to race, which benefits us because it also increases the excitement on the track. In fact, until the last moment, anything could have happened in the Hungarian GP, with Piastri attempting an attack on Norris until the final lap. Now, let's see what the technical reason was that caused Leclerc to slow down in the second part of the race. Ferrari talked about a damaged chassis, but the numbers on the track and the feedback from the paddock tell a different story. In fact, many are not convinced by Ferrari's official version. Leclerc did not have contact, there are no images of violent passes on the curbs, and most importantly, the loss of performance only occurred in the final part of the race. He was running on new tires. And here arises the doubt. If it wasn't the chassis, what caused the SF25 to collapse so suddenly? According to George Russell, Ferrari should have increased the pressure of the hard tires to avoid excessive wear on the floor. It seemed obvious to me, Russell stated. They were probably at the limit with the plank and had to lift the car by adjusting the pressures. That's the only logical explanation. Charles was going very fast in the first two stints, the Briton said at the end of the race. In fact, within the paddock, more authoritative voices confirmed that in the last set of tires, the pressures were higher in Ferrari. There was no radio communication from the team about lift and coast or going less on the curbs for Leclerc, so the floor was not the direct problem, but the pressures are related. And one must not forget China, when Ferrari was already disqualified for excessive plank wear. This has now become a recurring problem for Ferrari, and they wanted to avoid disqualification, so they quickly responded by increasing the tire pressures in the last stint. Leclerc was unable to drive with that pressure. Obviously, when you have more pressure in the tires, you have a greater ground clearance, which reduces the use of Venturi channels and therefore decreases aerodynamic load. Conversely, with lower tire pressure, you can better utilize the Venturi channels, gain more aerodynamic load, but also risk increased wear on the plank. If confirmed, this situation would be concerning because it would mean that the SF25, while performing well under ideal conditions, has extremely limited technical margins. It is a car sensitive to ground clearance, vulnerable to underbody wear, and forced to make compromising adjustments, such as increasing tire pressures. If this is the case, every bumpy circuit with high curbs could pose a real risk of losing competitiveness, or worse, exceeding the technical limits imposed by the FIA. Ferrari officially has not changed its version and still attributes the problem to Leclerc's chassis, but objectively, this interpretation coming directly from inside the paddock. That Ferrari was forced to increase the pressure of the hard tires in the last stint is the most convincing theory. In Maranello, they are working to find answers to this Leclerc issue because the second part of the season will start again at the end of August. They want to verify these problems, especially for Monza, and with such a dominant McLaren, a Mercedes that has returned because it was on par with McLaren in race pace. Ferrari cannot lower its guard, especially since the fight for second place in the Constructors' Championship is more open than ever. Leclerc cannot afford to waste another weekend, obviously not due to his own fault, but because of the car. And Hamilton can't even do it, who needs to try to recover in qualifying to improve in the race as well. But let's see how Hamilton approached this race and his statements. What we saw at Lungalinga is perhaps the lowest point of Lewis Hamilton's career in Formula 1. A bitter 12th place, far from the podium, and even further from the expectations he had when he arrived at Ferrari. But it wasn't just a disappointing weekend. It was a wake-up call because, at the end of the race, Hamilton didn't just talk about tires, strategy, or traffic. He spoke about something beyond that, about behind-the-scenes problems, internal fractures, and the feeling of no longer being in the right place. The defeat begins on Saturday. Hamilton is eliminated in Q2 by just a few thousandths, and his reaction is icy. He doesn't shout, he doesn't vent. He mutters a blunt phrase that, however, weighs like a ton. Maybe Ferrari should change drivers. A phrase that doesn't come by chance is the expression of a deeper malaise rooted in a project that has not worked so far. Yet Hamilton seemed to be improving until a few GPs ago. The feeling with the SF25 in qualifying was getting better, and the gap with Leclerc seemed to be narrowing, but everything collapsed in Budapest, especially on one of his favorite tracks. Ferrari decided to start Lewis on hard tires in hopes of extending the first stint and gaining with an overcut, possibly by taking advantage of a safety car. But the plan failed after a few laps. Hamilton got stuck in traffic, trapped in the train, driven by Alonso with dirty air and no chance of overtaking. Meanwhile, the brakes started to overheat. The team repeatedly warned him via radio to lift and coast, manage the braking, cool the system. But on a track like the Nürburgring, where braking is frequent and hard, limiting brake use means staying behind. The result is that Hamilton never manages to get into a rhythm, spends the entire race in the pack unable to advance even after switching to medium tires. He finishes 12th without ever truly fighting for points. And it is his worst result in his career at Hungaroring, where he had already won 8 times at the end of the race. In front of the microphones, Hamilton is cold, measured, but not any less tough. "I didn't feel frustrated, but I couldn't do much more," he tells Sky. Then he adds, "I had no expectations, but it went much worse than any other season of mine." It is a statement that leaves no room for interpretation. Lays knows perfectly well that 2025 has so far been a failure. He has never found rhythm, has never truly shined, and perhaps most importantly, no longer feels part of a winning project. And the most shocking phrase comes when he is asked to explain the malaise of recent weeks. Hamilton responds, "When you have a feeling, it's a feeling, many things are happening in the background, which isn't great." He goes into detail, but it's clear that something has shifted in the relationship with Ferrari, perhaps already with his mind elsewhere. Yet, he wants to clarify one thing: "I still want to race and love driving." So, obviously, this isn't a premature retirement for Hamilton, but a lost confidence in this year's project. He's probably already thinking about 2026 with Ferrari. We also have to consider that Hamilton is involved in a project built from scratch in a team that developed the SF25 around Leclerc with a technical philosophy that doesn't quite suit his style. We know that Hamilton has never been comfortable with ground effect cars, how they generate aerodynamic load, and how to exploit that in corners. Moreover, switching from Mercedes to Ferrari completely changes the philosophy. Ferrari continues to struggle in dirty air and generates too much heat in the brakes, and it is beginning to have very narrow operating windows on setups and tires. Under these conditions, a battle-hardened driver like Lewis finds himself limited. He cannot express aggression, cannot recover during the race, and is penalized by conservative strategies that seem to ignore his style. Hamilton has a contract until 2026, but Ferrari will have to manage not only the technical development of the car, but also the morale of its 7-time world champion. Vassar himself has defended Hamilton, saying he is not demotivated, he is simply frustrated, but he will come back stronger, said Vassar. Lewis is demanding with the team, the car, the engineers, and also with himself, referring to Vassar, but most of all with himself, referring to Lewis. And that is also why he is a 7-time world champion. This is what Vassar stated. Right now, Luis is frustrated and finds himself in a situation where he cannot express his potential and cannot improve this single-seater that does not suit his driving style. In fact, it is likely that in the second half of the season we might see victories from Leclerc, but it is not certain that we will see victories from Hamilton because Lewis seems to simply not adapt to this car, and if you notice, when Leclerc is very strong, Hamilton struggles. For example, think of the recent races, think of Monaco. While when Leclerc is in difficulty, Hamilton manages to shine. The sprint race in Miami, the sprint race in China. The two drivers have very different driving styles and therefore have different needs for the single-seater. Ferrari is currently following the development of Leclerc, also because it is a car built on its base and has a more unstable rear, which Hamilton strongly criticizes. Therefore, it is likely that in the second half of the season, we will see Hamilton increasingly focused on 2026 and Leclerc trying to secure victories with this SF25, which has still shown a good pace after the upgrade to the floor and rear suspension. Andrea Stella himself also stated that Ferrari will fight for victories in the second part of the season, so we will see. It is also worth mentioning, as Vassar also said, that Hamilton had a good pace in Hungary, but was blocked behind a DRS train. We know that Hungary is very similar to Monaco when it comes to overtaking. It's almost impossible to pass, so it's understandable that he had a very poor race starting from behind and couldn't make a comeback, unlike in Belgium where he made a fantastic recovery. Another very interesting point made by Vassar is that Leclerc could have risked not finishing the race. This was due to both the wear of the plank, which could have led to disqualification, and because Lec said multiple times that the car had become unmanageable, risking an accident or damage so severe that it would force the Monegasque driver to retire. I'll conclude the video with a brief summary of this first part of the season. We've seen that the values have changed in recent races. We have a McLaren that dominates, but Ferrari is catching up thanks also to the latest updates, the rear suspension, and the floor, with a McLaren that excels especially in medium corners and with slightly higher temperatures when there is less grip on the track, because it can optimally manage tire temperatures while maintaining a steady pace. Therefore, in the second half of the season, we will see an open fight between Norris and Piastri, where currently Piastri seems to have the mental edge, whereas Norris struggles a bit more in this area. However, Norris's recent victory gives him an advantage. On the other hand, we have a Ferrari that, as I mentioned, can fight for victories in the second half of the season in my opinion. Red Bull with Verstappen is struggling a lot and is experiencing its most difficult period since 2017, with retirement in Austria, 5th place at Silverstone, 4th place at Spa, and 9th place in Hungary. Verstappen is going through a very difficult time at Red Bull. We also saw the departure of Christian Horner. Red Bull is experiencing zero grip in the slow corners, and Verstappen has said multiple times, it feels like driving on ice. In fact, the Racing Bulls are sometimes faster than Verstappen, so currently Red Bull seems to be the fourth force, especially since Mercedes is on the rise. After the setback with the rear suspension, we saw an excellent performance in Hungary, especially from Russell, who managed to maintain a steady pace at the end of the race and secure a podium. So, in the second half of the season, we might see a competitive McLaren fighting for victories. Following that, we see Mercedes and Ferrari right behind, battling it out, and currently, Red Bull appears to be the fourth force. But of course, Verstappen, a four-time world champion, should never be underestimated. Certainly, in terms of the standings, Red Bull is the fourth strongest team, but in terms of on-track performance, it will depend a lot on the type of circuit and also on the conditions. As for the other teams, I see Aston Martin clearly improving, as they managed to secure 5th place with Alonso and 7th with Stroll in Hungary, so they can aim for that 5th place in the constructors' standings. Williams seems to be struggling, but I believe they will perform better on low downforce circuits, which is why they had a lot of difficulty in Hungary. Sauber with Bordelito S in Hungary appears to be improving, but their performance is still inconsistent, while Racing Bulls seems to be a bit more steady with both Ajar and Lausanne. Meanwhile, Alpine is currently the most struggling, occupying the last positions in the standings. What do we expect from the second half of the season? Certainly, an increase in Aston Martin's performance, a great Bortito that, if it continues to do better than Hülkenberg, well, that's a lot. Also, growth from Antonelli, whom we expect to see more often in the top 10, and it will be interesting to see who will prevail in racing bulls between Lozin and Ajar. Let me know in the comments your opinion on this first part of the season and on the technical issue faced by the team. I'm curious to read and respond to all your comments. As always, I remind you to leave a like, subscribe, and activate notifications so you don't miss any videos on the channel. I wish you a good summer break and good vibes. From Ras, that's all. See you at the next one.